but I just signed the largest trade deal in history. I think maybe the largest deal in history with Japan.
Of course, Canada's relationship is far more integrated across the border than Japan's economy is with the United States, but it's still a good, valuable piece of insight.
President Trump just made headlines with what he calls the biggest trade deal in U.S. history. Japan, America's longtime ally, agreed to a 15% tariff on its auto exports to the U.S., down from the 25% that had been threatened earlier this year. In return, Japan pledged a massive $550 billion investment into the U.S. economy, aimed at energy projects, rare earth supply chains, and domestic manufacturing. At first glance, it looks like a classic Trump win. But for trade watchers, and especially Canada, it's something else entirely. The deal with Japan is not the end of a negotiation cycle. It's the opening move in a broader strategy. And now, that strategy is facing resistance.
The Japanese, very close allies with the Americans, and they're going to be hit with a 15% tariff. So are we, and that the president has basically said, look, no country will be exempt from tariffs. We're not going back to 2 or 3%. There will be a baseline of 10 or 15%, even for close allies.
The Japan deal came with terms that raised eyebrows in Ottawa. Despite the flashy investment number, Japan failed to secure the removal of key sectoral tariffs, particularly on steel. Those Section 232 tariffs remain in place, and the 15% auto tariff is still 5 times higher than the rate Japan faced before Trump returned to office in January 2025. For Canada, the implications are serious. If even Japan, with all its leverage, couldn't get a full exemption, then the odds of a no-tariff deal for Canada look slim. But here's where the story takes a turn. Instead of rushing to follow Japan's lead, Prime Minister Mark Carney is choosing a different path, one that signals confidence, not desperation. His government is now shifting from defense to offense. The goal? If the U.S. insists on keeping baseline tariffs, Canada will push to eliminate the sectoral ones on steel, aluminum, lumber, and autos. And if Trump won't move, then Canada is prepared to act on its own terms.
I have no problem, but I don't trust President Trump as far as I can throw him. He constantly changes his mind. It's you just don't know who you're dealing with.
This isn't just a federal effort. Ontario Premier Doug Ford, speaking from Huntsville, put it plainly, Canada buys more from the U.S. than Japan ever will. $349 billion a year, compared to Japan's $79 billion, based on U.S. Census data from 2024. Canada isn't a minor partner. It's the customer that pays the bills. Across the provinces, that sentiment is catching on. From Alberta to Nova Scotia, premiers are pushing for deeper domestic production of steel, clean energy, and critical minerals. There's growing investment in SMRs, small modular nuclear reactors, and new energy pipelines that bypass U.S. dependency altogether. Canada's message is simple. If Washington won't ease the pressure, Ottawa and the provinces will make sure Canada no longer needs to ask.
He's our friend, and I don't consider Americans enemy. But right now, President Trump himself is acting like the enemy.
The Trump administration has used tariffs to pressure partners into action. But this time, the strategy might backfire. In recent months, Canada has quietly built economic leverage of its own. Imports of American steel and alcohol are already down. Tourism to the U.S. has fallen by more than 60% since the first round of tariffs in March 2025, according to Statistics Canada. That's not just political protest, it's real economic impact. Now, as Trump promotes the Japan deal as a model for future negotiations, Ottawa is studying it closely, not to copy, but to counter. The logic is clear. If Trump demands concessions to secure investment, Canada can demand fairness in return for access. And if that doesn't happen, Carney's team is preparing for a selective pushback through tariffs, market diversification, and regulatory shifts that affect U.S. companies operating in Canada. Trump's deal with Japan was supposed to set the tone. Instead, it may have triggered a new dynamic. Canada is no longer simply reacting to tariffs. It's rewriting the rules of engagement. Mark Carney isn't chasing a deadline. He's building leverage. And across Canada, premiers are reinforcing that stance, with pipelines, with manufacturing, and with a growing appetite to reduce dependence on U.S. markets. August 1st is the next marker in this negotiation. But for once, it's not just Trump setting the terms. Canada is now playing its own game, and it's doing it with eyes wide open.
So as you heard, the federal government continues to face mounting pressure to get a deal done with the United States.
I think we do need an urgent resolution, but not at all costs. So I do think it's good to put some urgency on this, both for the Canadian economy and the U.S. economy.
Canada is in the middle of a trade standoff it never asked for, but it may still be able to shape how this story ends. As Trump's 35% tariffs loom, many expected Canada to cave quickly under pressure. But that hasn't happened. Instead, Prime Minister Mark Carney has taken a disciplined approach, deliberate, methodical, and unusually quiet in contrast to Trump's headline-driven playbook. His goal is not to win a public shouting match, but to secure real exemptions where it matters most: energy, steel, aluminum, and autos. This isn't about getting to zero tariffs. Even Carney has acknowledged that a no-tariff agreement is no longer realistic. But there is room to shift the outcome, from total imposition to selective protection. The likely landing zone? A general tariff rate in the 8 to 10% range, with key sectors carved out. That wouldn't be a victory in full, but it would be a reversal of momentum, away from Trump's terms and toward Canada's priorities. And that shift matters. Because this time, the pressure isn't one-sided.
I watched the show this morning. They were talking about, well, when's he going to make the deal? The deals are already made. The letters are the deals. The deals are made. There are no deals to make.
Trump doesn't use tariffs as tools. He uses them as declarations. Letters sent to trade partners, including Canada, aren't warnings. They're, in his view, the final word. The letters are the deals, as his team describes it. But the strategy is unstable. Inconsistent deadlines, sudden shifts, and unilateral decisions have created confusion across industries. Even close allies don't know whether they're negotiating or reacting. And this isn't just about politics. The economic impact is beginning to show. According to the San Francisco Federal Reserve, U.S. GDP could shrink by 0.4% over the medium term due to these tariffs. Inflation has already climbed to 2.7% as of June, partly driven by increased import costs. And 45% of all U.S. imports are inputs, materials and components used by domestic manufacturers. When tariffs go up, so do their production costs. That means higher prices, slower hiring, and less room to invest. These are not hypothetical risks. They're playing out in real time. Canada, however, has more at stake. Its economy is more exposed, more export-driven, and deeply tied to U.S. demand. A report from Yale's Budget Lab estimates that Canada's GDP could fall by as much as 2.1% if the 35% tariffs are fully implemented without relief. Provinces like Ontario and Quebec, both manufacturing hubs, would feel the sharpest pain. But Canada is not standing still. While negotiations continue, Canadian exports to non-U.S. partners are rising. Canada is also accelerating trade outreach in Europe, Singapore, and India. This quiet realignment won't solve the short-term pain, but it strengthens Canada's hand in the long game. Meanwhile, Carney's team is coordinating provincial subsidies, investment guarantees, and federal assistance to help targeted industries weather the uncertainty. Steel, auto, and clean energy sectors are being stabilized, not dismantled.
Couple of months. But we should push, but not for a deal at all costs. And we've got to be willing to hold our line. And I think Prime Minister Carney has generally done a very good job.
A deal may still be reached before August 1st, but it won't erase the damage. Even if tariffs are reduced, the shock to supply chains, investor confidence, and bilateral trust won't be easily undone. This episode is about more than numbers. It's about how power is used and how it is resisted. Trump may still get his headline. But if Canada emerges with key sectors protected and a broader strategy for independence intact, the real story may not be one of submission. It may be one of quiet defiance. And in a world where trade wars are now fought with tweets and tariff letters, that kind of defiance might be the only form of strength that still matters.
As soon as Donald Trump was elected and began talking about repealing the IRA and the subsidies, we told them all Ontario is 100% in. with the subsidies that, with the investments, as we call them, that we agreed to in the first place. With or without the IRA, you can count on Ontario.
In the middle of one of the most uncertain chapters in North American trade, Canada is holding the line. As President Trump ramps up tariff threats and strips away nearly all electric vehicle subsidies in the United States, the logic would suggest Canada should pull back, rethink its own plans, reassess the risks. But that's not what's happening. From Windsor to St. Thomas and across Ontario's industrial heartland, Canada is doubling down. Its electric vehicle strategy isn't just surviving the pressure, it's becoming a symbol of economic sovereignty.
The path to a possible deal is riddled with uncertainty. And on top of tariffs, U.S. President Donald Trump's big, beautiful bill leaves some big unanswered questions about the future of electric vehicles in Canada.
Last week, President Trump signed the Big Beautiful Bill, which effectively repealed most federal tax credits for electric vehicles in the U.S. For Canada, this was a major disruption. Many of its EV investments, over 30 billion Canadian dollars in joint federal-provincial commitments, were designed with alignment to the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act. Battery hubs like Windsor and St. Thomas were suddenly exposed to market risk. Honda even paused its project for 2 years. But instead of pulling back, Ontario responded with clarity. Every dollar committed will remain committed. The province, along with the federal government, is protecting 100,000 existing auto jobs and aiming to create tens of thousands more. A $30 billion contingency, described as firepower, has been set aside to support manufacturers through tax relief and targeted programs. Ontario is also making a broader point, that Canada remains a stable, rules-based environment. Over the last 2 years, it has attracted 184 international companies, secured $70 billion in new investment, and created 18,000 manufacturing jobs. As global firms look for alternatives to the volatility in U.S. politics, Canada is offering reliability. Despite policy headwinds, the electric vehicle market is not slowing down. Global EV sales rose 25% in 2024, according to the International Energy Agency. Canada's federal mandate to require 20% of all new vehicle sales to be electric by 2026 remains unchanged. While some automakers are asking for delays, Ontario argues that abandoning the target would risk wasting billions already invested in infrastructure and production. By staying on course, Canada positions itself as a credible EV hub for Europe and Asia, partners looking for supply chains that aren't bound to Washington's policy swings. This isn't just industrial planning, it's an insurance policy. All of this plays out under the shadow of looming tariffs. President Trump has threatened to impose a 35% tariff on Canadian goods starting August 1st unless a new trade agreement is reached. Talks are ongoing, but the Canadian side admits there's little visibility. Even ministers say privately that they don't know how close or far apart the two sides are. Still, Ontario is preparing for every outcome. The EV investments are not contingent on Washington's behavior. And if a deal doesn't come, the transition doesn't stop. It continues, backed by the funding and political will already in motion.
Hopefully, we can manage that number down, and hopefully we can preserve our broader market access. But gosh, it's so challenging getting.
Canada's insistence on holding the EV line is about more than electric cars. It's about proving that a country can chart its own course, even in the face of economic pressure from its largest trading partner. In a world of volatile politics, trust is currency, and Canada is betting that, in the long run, trust will outlast tariffs.